Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Justin D'Souza. I'm a quantitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. During today's webinar, we are going to discuss preparation for the quantitative defense. I will be touching on really qualitative as well, I guess. My specialty is more on quantitative and statistics, so I can speak more to those sections. But a lot of the same logic will apply to qualitative studies as well. My colleague Janine is here as well, and she will be assisting with any questions that we may have during the webinar. You can type those questions into the chat box or the question and answer box. At the end of the webinar, I will be doing a Q&A session. So you can ask any of your questions in those boxes, and we will be sending everyone a recording, a copy of the webinar itself, and a copy of the recording. Okay, so I'll give a brief overview of the services that our company Statistics Solutions provides. Then we will dive into the topic today, defense preparation. I'll show some examples from different schools. We'll conclude with a summary and a question and answer session. Our company, Statistics Solutions, provides assistance with every part of the dissertation. So no matter where you are, if you're at topic development, trying to frame your research questions, trying to find a gap in the literature, or maybe you're at the prospectus and concept paper section, depending on what school you go to. The way our company works is we provide methodologists and we provide literature review specialists to assist you. So perhaps you're doing a quantitative study, you need help with chapter 1 and 3, but not chapter 2 right now, then you can pick and choose what chapters you need the most assistance with, and we'll provide the specialist to you. We assist with both quantitative and qualitative chapters and papers. We assist with IRB forms, data entry templates. We have our own SurveyMonkey account that we can host a survey for you. Then we help with the results chapters, discussion, PowerPoints for proposal and final defenses, and journal publications. So if you have any questions about the services that we provide, you can give us a call at 727-442-4290. On this link, on this slide, I have 2 hyperlinks that provide lists of the previous webinars that we've done and upcoming ones we will be doing in the future. And regarding today's topic, so we're talking about preparation for the defense. Some schools do have a proposal defense and a final defense. Some schools just have a final defense. It really depends. I think the norm, most schools have both. The proposal defense usually involves providing a summary of your proposal chapters, the introduction, literature review, and the methodology. So it's really summarizing the key points from these chapters. You're going to justify why your study needs to be conducted, and you're going to provide a gap in the literature, a purpose for the study, a problem statement, perhaps your theoretical framework. But a big part of this is really justifying the methodology for your study. How are you going to conduct your study in particular? What separates it from other studies that have been done in the past? Really providing justifications, identifying your population of interest, giving a sample size estimate through a power analysis, identifying your research questions. What is your data collection method? Are you using a survey or are you using archival data? What analyses are you going to use to address those research questions? The final defense is then adding the results and discussion chapter. Usually IRB approval has been given, and then you collect your data, you report the results. That's when you add the last two chapters. So a lot of the information in the final defense is going to carry over from the proposal defense, but you're shifting things to past tense now. The proposal defense will be in future tense because you will be collecting data at the stage. At the results and the discussion phase, you've collected the data already, so everything will be in past tense. So the primary focus here is reporting what the quantitative results were for your study and what are the implications of these findings for future studies or for the current literature. As far as preparation, there's a lot of things you can do. You can ask your school for a template. A lot of schools have a PowerPoint template that they want you to follow. There may be minimum and maximum slide counts. You have to check if there's an estimated length. Is there a minimum and maximum length that your committee wants the presentation to be? On average, I see slide count between 20 and 30 slides. And the length can fluctuate. Some schools I've seen, they want it to be 20 minutes, other schools more toward 45 minutes. I think the average is somewhere right in the middle there, probably about a 30-minute presentation altogether. Then you want to request for approved examples from your committee. This doesn't even only apply to the defense, this applies to your paper as well. I always recommend that you look for a template and examples from your school, preferably examples that your committee has worked on in the past. So then you have a template for what they're looking for. You'll want to ask your committee what types of questions you can expect. So you don't want to be surprised during the defense. You don't want to see something brand new. Ask your committee what types of questions they think they'll be asking based on how the dissertation looks. Or maybe there was a particular comment as you were working on the proposal and the results chapter. Maybe there was something that sticks out in the feedback that they gave you that they might bring up on the defense. Good to be prepared for those questions. I always recommend doing flashcards because a lot of the justification comes from definitions of terms. Methodology, for instance, you're justifying why you selected a quantitative design. Why didn't you select qualitative? Why did you select a experimental design versus correlational? You want to have definitions for all these terms so you can justify it for your study. But I do have an example of a template here. And this template is for GCU. This is Grand Canyon University. And they have a really good template, I will say, for the defense. They have all the essential slides, in my opinion. It starts with the background and the gap. And this is for the final defense. And you'll see that a lot of the same slides carry over. You have the problem statement and the purpose statement, then your research questions and hypotheses. Then you might want to consider doing tables. It's good to have visual representations. So something like this, where you list the variables of interest, you'll want to have a table for this, I would say. Justifying your population, and they give all the information. The target population is, the sample is, the unit of analysis is, and then you want to provide a power analysis usually. What was the minimum sample size you need to target? Then you touch on instrumentation. Are you using a survey or are you using archival data? Data collection procedures. Are you using something like SurveyMonkey, or are you collecting surveys in person? And then limitations, strengths and weaknesses, and the analysis procedures. This is probably one of the bigger sections in here. It's something a lot of clients I work with, they get the most nervous about this section. They aren't statistically savvy. So in this section, you need to justify why you selected the analyses you did. Okay, and you want to go research question by research question. I would say one slide per research question. Justify why you selected using a correlation, or why did you select using a t-test or an ANOVA or a regression. You have to justify those decisions, and it's usually based on level of measurement and whether you're trying to look at an association, or are you trying to predict something. If you're trying to predict, usually a regression model. If you're looking for differences, it's something like a t-test or an ANOVA. It really depends on the goals of the research. So I did see a question in here before I started the webinar about how do you present the assumptions without boring the committee to death? Really good question. And the best way I would do it is by not putting everything in there. I wouldn't put every single assumption, every single figure in here. You kind of want to glance over that part. You want it to be efficient. So I would say put a summary. You just want to have a summary of the assumption checking. A lot of them are implied, level of measurement. You need to have continuous variables, or you need to have a categorical variable. For something like a t-test, you need to have two groups. I would say have 1 to 2 slides to talk about assumption testing. It's important you say that you check them and that the assumptions were met, which allows you to progress to the results themselves. So just 1 to 2 slides, a brief summary. I wouldn't say put every single scatter plot in there. Okay. The proposal defense would end around here. After you talk about data analysis procedures, you might touch on ethical procedures. How are you going to make sure that you're following ethical constraints for the study? And then the proposal defense usually ends right there, and then you'll provide references at the bottom and do a question and answer session. The final defense will then add the results. Okay, so I would have 1 slide, and I have examples here that I will show in just a bit. But you're going to have 1 slide that discusses the demographics, okay? And you could just copy and paste your entire demographic table into here. Gender, age, ethnicity, things like that. Then you want to go research question by research question. 1 slide per research question. Okay, and what is the overall takeaway? Do we reject our null hypothesis, or do we fail to reject our hypothesis? And then you go to implications, okay? How do the findings compare to other studies? What are the implications of these findings for future studies? What are the recommendations for future research? And then that's where the final defense ends. So there's a huge crossover between the two. Once you have the proposal defense, you can just copy a lot of the slides for that one for your final defense and shift things to past tense. Okay, going back to the slideshow. This is the general template that I see a lot of people follow. This is kind of based on GCU. You go through the introduction chapters, and you can go based on the headings for those chapters. Use the exact template for your school, and just follow the section headings in the dissertation. And then again, you're going to end right here, data analysis process. That's where you will end for the proposal defense, and then you add these last two sections, final. Okay, some things to consider as far as location. If you're doing the presentation remotely, which I think a lot of people are right now, using something like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, or Google Meet, I think that gives you an advantage because you can print out your entire dissertation. You can highlight key sections. You can have note cards. You can have note cards of talking points, have definitions of terms ready to go. Plus, before you even do this, you want to test out how the software works. I think a huge thing of this is not being surprised. And that applies to doing it in person as well. If you do have to do the defense in person, you want to familiarize yourself with the location. So if you're using a projector, a USB, HDMI, PowerPoint, there could be a lot of wires and a lot of connecting to make that happen. So just make sure that you're comfortable with the equipment that they have in that room. Again, I can't stress flashcards enough. I think flashcards are really good for preparation as far as the methods go, because you have to know definitions of terms, which will be very helpful during the defense. But then you can also have those flashcards during your defense if you're doing it remotely, and have those terms defined, have key talking points identified. Okay, so now I'll show you a couple examples. I showed you the template for GCU. This is what a proposal defense looks like. I'll just go through it briefly because we kind of just reviewed the template, but showing you the type of information that's in here. And this person used a lot of citations. It's something I would recommend, is justifying your decisions through references. So they provided the background and gap, theoretical framework. They used figures. I think figures are good for conceptual models. If you're doing path analysis or something more complicated like that, then it's good to have figures. Then we touch on the problem statement, purpose statement, research questions, the research method. You can see that this person included talking points at the bottom here. This won't appear on the slide, but it's a talking point for the client to identify what she should discuss. Research method and design is a pretty big one, I would say. Justifying why did you select a quantitative method? Did you consider using qualitative methods? Did you consider interviewing people? Why did you select a experimental design versus other designs? Just justifying those decisions. Then we have a variable table. This is really the best way, I would say, to present it. Try to use tables where you can and avoid having bullet points in narrative. Something like this, where variable is a list of different components that have categories. I think a table is best for this. Then we have the population and sample, identifying the population and the results of the power analysis. What is the minimum sample that you need to target? Then continuing to discuss the sample, instrumentation. So this person had a demographic questionnaire. You'll want to talk about de-identifying the data. How are you making sure that no names are provided, no phone numbers, no email addresses? What are you doing to protect the participants who are taking the survey? And then we have a good flow chart here. This is another thing I would probably recommend is visuals, right? As opposed to having 10 bullet points for data collection procedures, a flow chart is going to better present in a concise way. So I would recommend doing that. Then we have data analysis procedures. Also a pretty big section, and we talked about this during the PowerPoint. It's justifying why you selected certain analyses. How are you cleaning the data? What types of things are you going to report? Frequencies for demographic variables, things like means and standard deviations for continuous variables. Maybe you're checking Cronbach alpha for reliability. Then going through assumptions. Okay, so we had that question earlier about how do I present my assumptions without it being extremely boring? And you just, I would say, have one slide like this. This person did go through them in quite a bit of depth, but you don't necessarily have to do this. I would say maybe 1 to 2 slides and just have talking points about each one and say whether the assumption is met or not. But keeping in mind, this is a proposal defense. This one doesn't have the results in it. It's just up to the methodology. So she discusses what assumptions will be assessed, okay, what will happen, what needs to happen so the assumption is supported. And then the big analysis for this project was a MANOVA. On this slide, it's justifying why the MANOVA was necessary. And then we have references at the bottom and a question and answer set. That is for GCU. And then I have another example here, and this is for a different school. This is for Columbia Southern University. I also like this example because their template was very straightforward. It's a lot of the section headings you see for a dissertation. Again, you go through all the introductory information, population sample, research method and design. Try to use less words if you can. Like here, she just put quantitative, non-experimental, correlational. There's not a ton of text. You want to have more talking points, if possible, than having paragraphs or bullet points. And going along here, this is where the results start, okay? She just copied and pasted the entire demographic table. I think that's a good way to do it. You then want to discuss unexpected findings, okay? So anything that you didn't see coming, anything that was relatively surprising, that's what you want to discuss in the demographic table. Or if maybe something was completely expected, that's what you want to report. Maybe the demographics perfectly align with your population. That's something you want to talk about. Then we have descriptive statistics on the variables of interest. Here we are checking for normality, okay, making sure that the variables follow a bell-shaped distribution. Many ways to do this. You can look at tests of significance. You can look at scatter plots. You can look at histograms. Just make sure you're doing the one that your committee wants the most. Then we present the results of the research questions. I would recommend one slide, at least one slide per research question. And Here we found a significant association. What does that mean? And always end with a statement about the hypothesis. What the findings to connect back to the hypotheses. So here we talk about the null hypothesis being partially rejected. Kind of a unique case. You don't see that a lot, but one correlation was supported and the others were not. That's why this one was partially rejected. Then there's a discussion of the implications and conclusions, and finally a question and answer session. So speaking of which, I will now do a question and answer session for today's topic. If we have any questions, you can put those in the chat box. I do see that Janine has been answering some questions. If you have any questions about the services we provide, you can give us a call here at 727-442-4290. And you can email us at info@statisticsolutions.com. We offer free consultations in which we can guide you in the right direction. All right, let's see. We have a question from Deborah. Is it a general rule of thumb to put info variables results of different sections into tables and figures in the dissertation write-up, not only for PowerPoint presentations? I think, so the question's about putting in tables in the dissertation write-up. Yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend the narrative and the PowerPoints should have tables. I think tables and figures are a good way to summarize the findings. Some colleges want them in the appendix of the paper and they don't want it in the body. It really depends on the school. Most of the time I see tables and figures in the body, in the narrative of the paper. Okay. Do we have any other questions? Okay. What is the difference between an assumption and a hypothesis? So a hypothesis is tied back to your research question. Okay, let me show you an example here. Okay, here we have a research question. What is the relationship between toxic leadership and these different types of organizational commitment? The hypothesis, usually you're connecting your findings back to this hypothesis right here. It's called the null hypothesis. And you're trying to prove that this statement is false. And you're trying to disprove the null hypothesis, which in turn means you're proving that the alternative hypothesis is true. Okay, so these are hypotheses. They always connect back to your research question. You can see how similar it's phrased. It is the research question posed as a statement. One says there is no relationship, one says there is. Assumptions are things that you have to check before running your analysis. So whenever you're doing an inferential analysis like correlation or a t-test, you have to check assumptions. Things like normality. You have to make sure that your data follows a bell-shaped distribution before you run things like correlations, Pearson correlations, and independent t-tests. If the data does not meet those assumptions, then you have to consider a backup plan. Okay, in this example here, we propose to run Pearson correlations to look at the relationship between commitment and toxic leadership. The normality assumption was not met, so we have to come up with a contingency plan. And And that plan was to run a Spearman correlation as a backup. Okay, so we changed the plan from Pearson to Spearman based on how the assumption of normality came out. Okay, does that make sense? And there are many different assumptions depending on the analysis that you're running. A good way to figure that out, you can find it on our company website. You can take a look at, it would really be under data analysis plan, but also Intellectus, which is our company software. This is Intellectus, and if you go to data analysis plans and, for example, t-test, we talk about the assumptions that you should verify for running a t-test, and normality, homogeneity, and variance. I'll briefly show you the software as well. So Intellectus is used for crunching numbers, and it's used for reporting results in APA format. Okay, it's really like magic. I'm not even kidding you. Like, you can edit your data in here. We've cross-referenced everything with SPSS. All the results will match SPSS. You can remove for outliers. You can transform your data. You can download the data. You can recode or transform into different distributions. Then once you get to the analyses, you can run all these different types of tests. So for example, I wanted to see strain scores. It gives you a write-up, and it gives you all these different statistics. And then we can run correlations and t-tests. We have every type of analysis that is run. Okay, for example, if we do a correlation here, and go to options, you can see what assumptions are going to be checked here, kind of tying back to our previous question. So check for linearity. And then click calculate, you'll see it presents a scatter plot of the relationship, and then it tells you the strength of the correlation along with an interpretation. So just a brief demonstration of the software. We have power analyses in here, data analysis plans, which is more for the methodology chapter. And we do consulting sessions as well every day of the week. So let us know if you're interested in checking out the software. Do we have any other questions? Let's see, I think we are getting some questions. I've been looking at the question box more than the chat box. Let me take a look at the chat box.
I'm adding the ones that are in the chat more recently in there and directly to you, so you should be able to see them.
Okay. Yes, we're going to send everyone a copy of the recording of today's webinar, as well as the PowerPoint. I'll have to see about the examples. I'm sure we can send it over, but they are previous examples of clients we've worked with, so I will have to double check with that. But you can just rewatch the presentation. You know, I did go through every slide on those, so you can kind of see what is necessary for the defense. So you can rewatch the presentation if we are unable to send the examples. What's the difference between conceptual literature and related literature? That's a good question. Unfortunately, a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, and I do more methods and results. We do have webinars that cover the literature review. So I would check those out, and they can answer your question better than I could. Okay, we had a question about how the hypotheses were written. And it's really, I've seen it written many different ways. So this example here it was H1O, and I've seen the 1 being a subscript and the O being a 0. It's really inconsistent. I would say just pick one method and be consistent throughout the paper. I've seen it 10 different ways over the years. Is there a specific formula for calculating sample size on a qualitative study? Not to my knowledge, not like a power analysis. There's kind of rule of thumbs that you should follow, like based on the specific methodology that you're using, whether it's a case study or phenomenology. You might need a minimum target, and different researchers will provide different cutoffs. You know, they might say 5 to 10 people. Some people might say you need 10 to 12 participants. It's going to fluctuate based on the reference you read. So I would say use the reference that is best tailored to your study. We had a question about the power analysis in G-Power. It actually mirrors what G-Power does. So we double checked all the analyses in G-Power. So it's following the same procedure. So I can show you an example here. So t-tests, if we look at a t-test, we provide 3 different power analyses based on the effect size that you are examining. If you have a large effect size, you generally need fewer participants, but you are anticipating a strong relationship between your variables. So a large effect size yields 52 people at a minimum. A medium effect size yields 128. And we can replicate that in G-Power here. Here's a t-test. And if we do a 2-group comparison, the 2-tailed test, we need about 128 participants, which is what we have here, which means about 64 people in group 1 and group 2. And we have power analyses for all these different tests, ANOVAs and MANOVAs and regressions. Regressions are based on the number of predictors you have, which you can change at the top here. ANOVAs are based on the number of groups that you're comparing, and you can change that up here, number of categories. All right, do we have any other questions? And we can take a look at what is on the horizon for webinars. This is our company website. And if you go to webinars and upcoming free dissertation webinars, you can see what we're doing in the future. Looks like in a couple days, we have a qualitative results chapter presentation that my colleague Rachel will be doing. And then mastering your introduction. This will be done by my colleague Tom. So we had that question about conceptual framework versus related literature. If you join during this webinar, Tom will be able to address your question. And then we also have the recordings for the past webinars. You go to the webinar archive. You can watch the video for all the previous webinars we've done, and there's a lot of them. Okay. All right, do we have any other questions? All right, well, thanks for joining, everyone. Come join us for the future webinars. If you have any questions, reach out to the number provided in the presentation. If you have questions about the services we provide, and just let us know if you have any questions. Have a great day.